Okay, so let's talk about some process stuff. So this is the process start to finish, whether you're talking an RFP or an RFQ. This is from the government side. This is how our process looks. And then we're going to talk about how it looks from the vendor side. Okay? So we spend a whole bunch of time preparing the RFP or the RFQ. That's all done before most vendors even know we're working on something like this. You don't even know it, but we've spent a chunk of time preparing the documents ahead of time. First time you know about it, it gets publicly posted. Okay, so it's up on BC Bid. Okay? And of course, you're going to put your responses or your proposals together. And then there's this formal evaluation process. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment, what that looks like. And in particular, for those of you, how many of you have submitted on an RFP or an RFQ and waited a really long time to find out if you made it? A few? Yeah. We're going to talk about why it takes so long. We're going to talk about that process, that evaluation process. Once our evaluation process is done, we have our notification. As I said earlier, we always tell the successful vendor first, or vendors in the case of an RFQ, okay, that you were successful. When it comes to telling everybody else, normally, if this is an RFP, we often will wait until the contract is signed before we let everybody else know. And the reason we do that is if there is something that goes wrong in working out the details with our highest scoring proponent, we don't want everybody else thinking, oh, I don't have it and, off the hook kind of thing, and I'm going to go move on to other things when we don't have a contract signed yet. So we like to have that contract signed because then it's done deal, and when we tell you that you were unsuccessful, if you were an unsuccessful proponent in this, then you know it's already a done deal. It's not a matter of depending on whether or not we can sign a contract. Now, having said that, there are some times when we will tell you prior to signing the contract that you were not successful. And I know for myself, if I think that the contract negotiations might take a while, I like to tell you ahead of time simply because I think it's better for you to hear officially than through the grapevine. Right? Because vendors talk, right? Your successful vendor is likely going to start talking. You're going to hear about it somewhere down the line. Much better that it's done more officially. So sometimes you'll hear after the contract's signed and sometimes before. And I know for myself, if I'm announcing before a contract's signed, I will remind the unsuccessful proponents that their proposals are valid. It's usually 90 days after closing, just in case we can't negotiate something with our highest scoring. Just as a bit of a reminder. Okay. So we're going to let you know, and everybody is going to be told. For RFQs and RFPs, you're going to be told. Whether you were successful or not, you're going to know. If there is a shortlist process, and this doesn't happen often, but think of a shortlist. Let's say I'm doing an RFP, and I want to take my 3 highest scoring, and we're going to do an interview, or we're going to do a presentation. That's called a shortlist process. It takes lots of different forms. If we're going to do a shortlist process, it needs to be in the RFP. You won't have a lot of details as to what's included, but you'll know the basics. Like I've done them where we did a site visit of the proponent's plant and interviewed their proposed project manager. I've done them where we were given usernames and passwords to a system, and we're going to test out the user friendliness and functionality of the system. There are lots of different ways that they can be arranged, but the RFP needs to tell you if there's going to be a shortlist process. And then that gets built into our process. So in this case, we would notify our shortlisted proponents that they were shortlisted. We would give them whatever information they needed to know about the shortlist process, and then we would go forward with the shortlist, add that score to whatever they had in their proposal to come up with our highest scoring. That's typically how it works. Okay, so once we finished off all of our evaluation process, we have our highest scoring. We're going to either finalize our contract, or in the case of an RFQ, we're going to have our list. Here's our list of qualified suppliers. And then for those who are unsuccessful, you'll be offered a debrief. I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. One thing I will say, though, strongly, strongly recommend that if you're unsuccessful in RFPs or RFQs, that you ask for a debrief. The information you can get is hugely valuable for your organization. Okay? So that's fairly typical then of the process that we'd use in an RFP or an RFQ. Okay? So from your end, from the vendors, okay, first thing for you to do is you need to read the opportunity. End to end. Don't leave anything out. It might look good initially, but when you read all the fine print, does it still look good? Do you think you might be successful at this? That's all the purpose of you getting a real thorough read. Can you meet all the mandatories? Because remember, if you can't, there's a mandatory there that you cannot meet, you simply do not have, you're wasting your time by submitting a proposal. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with asking for a mandatory to be changed. If you are asking for a mandatory to be changed, though, you really want to have a compelling reason for it. We don't change mandatories most of the time. It's not something we like to do, because the mandatories are things that the vendors rely on. Those who can meet the mandatories, they rely on them staying firm. And then there are vendors who might look at the opportunity, see the mandatories, oh, I can't meet all of that, and never go back again. And are we being fair if suddenly we change the mandatories? Can we change them? Yes. Sometimes we have. We just don't like to. But if there is a mandatory that you see as being a real problem, and think about it past just your own organization. Like maybe we have established a mandatory requirement that you have a more in-depth knowledge of the industry, and you say, look, there's nobody who can meet this. Nobody has this. Okay, that would be a really compelling reason, saying, you know, I'm not aware of anyone in our in this industry that can meet that mandatory requirement. You should remove it, or you should change it to such and such. Because maybe we misunderstood, you know, when we wrote the mandatory, we didn't write it well. You know, that's fine. Ask those questions. But as I say, mandatories don't often get changed without a compelling reason. Mandatory closing date and time, nothing wrong with asking for an extension. If you're going to ask for an extension, be specific on how long and why it's needed. Right? If we get a question, can you extend the closing date of the RFP, please? Well, probably not. But if you come to us and say, can you extend the closing date of the RFP because there's an industry conference happening that week that's going to make it very problematic for a number of proponents to be able to meet your deadline. Well, we didn't realize that there was an industry conference happening that week. That might be a really good reason for it. Okay? Or we might decide to extend the closing date because we had really good questions come in at last minute and you guys need the time. So we might just do it on our own as well. So you can ask those questions. Then you want to look at the benchmarks. What is it that the RFP is asking for? And the evaluation criteria that it's provided. How do you think you're going to do? Where do you see your strengths and weaknesses being based on what's in that RFP or that RFQ? Okay? And this is an important piece because you need to know, based on what's in that document, what do you think the likelihood is that you're going to be successful? I went to a industry meeting a few months ago, and we had a guest speaker that was a vendor that responds a lot to RFPs. And what he said in his organization, what they do, when they read the opportunity, he says he doesn't bother submitting a proposal unless he thinks he has at least a 33% chance of being successful. So he knows who his competition is, he knows the strengths and weaknesses of his organization, he asks the questions he needs to ask to get the clarity out of the solicitation, and then he makes that decision. Do I think I have at least a 1/3 chance of being successful here? And if he does, those are the ones he responds to, and the rest he lets go. Because it's not worth putting his resources into that. Okay? That's his approach to that. If there's a proponent or respondents meeting, really good idea to go. Even if it's not mandatory, try and go to those. Because this is your only opportunity to look the government entity, VCC in this case, look us in the eye and ask your questions and get your answers while we can be in the same room together. Because a lot of times, you know, they say communication, so much of it is body language. You can write your question out, and I don't understand what you're asking me, or I think it's something that it's not. But if we can have a conversation looking each other in the eye, then we can go back and forth until I get what you're asking, until you understand the answer, or any limitations to what we have in giving that answer. Hugely valuable to be able to be in the same room and do that. Having said that, though, these meetings are not private meetings. Anybody who wants to attend can attend. And so if you're asking questions, it's going to be part of the official record, and all the other vendors who are there are going to hear your question and the answer. Again, that's ensuring that transparency of the process. A lot of times these meetings have a verbatim transcript done up for them that gets posted later. And again, that enables you to go back and see just what was said. And I personally like the verbatim transcripts. A lot of RFPs or RFQs for these meetings will put up minutes, and minutes are okay. But I like the verbatim transcript just because they're so thorough. They say every word you said is in there. So those are, to me, that gives you really detailed information, whereas minutes tend to be filtered and summarized. And if you weren't actually at the meeting, you're actually missing some of the detail. A verbatim transcript has it all there. Although I will tell you, if you've ever done a joke that's come across in a verbatim transcript, it doesn't translate very well. It just doesn't go over well at all. Okay.
That's where Maddie's coming.
Pardon me?
That's where the minutes come.
Yeah, yeah. I need to have these transcriptionists say laughter ensued or something in brackets. Okay, so and then you're gonna, if you figure that you have a chance at being successful, getting on the list or being the highest scoring proponent, that's when you're going to put your proposal or your response together. Now, and of course, giving yourself that time. We talked earlier about what happens if you're late. All that work you did, we're not even going to read it. Nobody wants to be there. Not us, not you for sure. Nobody wants to be there. You got to give yourself the time that it takes. And I know the argument that comes back, and I'm sure a few of you have been in this situation. Yeah, but what happens if there's this RFP where they're asking me 100 questions and they've given me 10 days to respond? Anybody seen that? Those really short turnaround times on RFPs and RFQs? It happens. Here at the college, we really make a concentrated effort not to do that. And my office in Victoria, we recommend a posting time of no less than 4 weeks, giving you guys time to put your proposals and your responses together. And quite frankly, it doesn't do anybody any favors to make it too short. Because if you're rushed to put a proposal together, it's not going to be a good proposal. It can't be. You haven't got time to make it good. And then we get to evaluate it. And I know from personal experience, it takes a lot longer to evaluate a poorly written proposal than one that's well written. Yeah, so if you've got a posting that's less than that, it's fine if it's asking for a half dozen questions. You're going to be submitting like a 15-page response. Fine, 3 weeks is fine for something small like that. But if it's a full-blown RFP, you know, that would, if I was a vendor, that would certainly be a question I would put up there. You know, 3 weeks is not enough time to answer 27 questions that you're asking for in this RFP. Can you please add at least 1 more week to your closing time? Nothing wrong with that. But worst they're going to say is no. At least you tried. Okay? So from your end, okay, a couple of suggestions when you are preparing your proposal or your response to this. Most RFPs and RFQs are going to have a section that tell you what to provide. You know, describe your approach to, explain your experience with, whatever, that type of questions or instructions. I strongly recommend you use those as headings in your proposal. And the reason I say this, having evaluated many proposals and responses, those that use the questions as headings, they never miss a question. I've seen lots of responses where there's like a few things that were asked and they put it all in one narrative, and that can be equally good. But it certainly increases the chances that you've missed one of the questions. You didn't answer it at all, which means you're scoring 0 for that question or for that information. Okay? And the other thing is it helps keep you on topic. I've seen lots of responses come in where it starts out answering the question and then the writer kind of gets off onto a tangent, and by the time they finish answering that question, it's not the same question anymore. And it has nothing to do with what we're looking for. But they think they've answered. So using headings, the questions as headings, is going to be hugely helpful for you. And it also puts your proposal in the same order that the RFP or the RFQ was, which again is going to be helpful to the evaluators because that's the order they're going to be evaluating in. Okay? You don't lose points if you don't do it this way, not unless the RFP or the RFQ said you're going to. But these are really helpful hints as to how to write the better proposal. Maximize your points. Okay? All right. Questions? So, we talked about this, how important it is that you address your questions to your contact person. You do it in writing, and not over the phone. I always recommend to the government people who issue these things, don't put your phone numbers there. You don't want them to call, so don't give them the phone number. You know, fax number and the email works just as well. You want to ask your questions as early as you possibly can. Okay? The more time you give us to answer your questions, the more thorough job we can do of it. And I'll give you an example of what happened to me one time. We had a proponents meeting, and this was for a fairly complicated RFP, had lots and lots of contractual terms and conditions. And I told the vendors, like I've done here today, if there's something there that you really can't live with, ask us the question. Don't promise we're going to change anything, but nothing wrong with asking what you'd like to see changed, what should we change it to and why. It was, I don't know, about 7-8 days before closing, and we had one proponent submit 42 questions on changes to the contractual terms and conditions. You know, 7-8 days before closing. 42 of them, huge number. And of course, we can't just arbitrarily do it. We need legal advice and all kinds of things when we're asked about the contract terms and conditions. And because they waited so late and had so many, the answers back were, nope, not considering any of them. So ask as early as possible. And if you're needing changes, especially to the contract terms and conditions, those are the ones you want to ask as early as possible. And it'd be really nice if there weren't 42 of them. You'll keep them to the ones that are the real deal breakers for you, the things you just can't live with. Okay? And you will need to look on the website for any addenda, whether or not you've asked questions. Somebody else might have, really good information you'll want to know, or the college might have just provided additional information that you really need to know, something we didn't include in the original document. Yes?
Is that just in the same area as where the open bids are?
Yes. Right, so if you go into BC Bid, and let's say I have, the college has something posted, and then we do an addendum to it, it's still the same number, it's still the same name, but if you go into it, if you click onto that link to it, you'll now, under the attachments that are with that opportunity, you'll see the addendum as well. And it'll tell you what addendum number we're on, what documents were added.
If you've signed on to the notification, does that email you with those as well?
Yeah, if you are signed up with e-notification, you can actually register for that RFP or that RFQ.
So
And it'll tell you, every time there's an update done, it'll tell you. You'll get an automatic email saying there's been an update to that RFP or that RFQ. Yeah. Really helpful for ensuring that you don't miss anything important. Okay. I will say one thing about e-notification, though, that's really important. The way the e-notification works in the BC Bid is at 6 p.m. each day, it takes all of the changes that were done and all the things that were added for that day, and it sends out the emails. So if you're on e-notification and you're hearing about something that was just posted today, you'll get that email at 6 p.m. If you signed up for that particular RFP at 6 p.m., you'll get the email. Okay, so it means we might have done the change at 10 in the morning, but the emails always go out the same time every day at 6 p.m. So that means if it's Friday that we've done changes, it's going to be 6 p.m. Friday, and unless you're connected to your emails at work, you might not get it till Monday. Just be aware of that. Okay? All right.